This past offseason, Russell Westbrook spent his summer doing something all of us can relate to in this economic climate, looking for a job. It's the same thing he had to do last summer and the summer before that, and that's weird. In theory, finding a gig with the resume that Brody has should be easier than tying a pair of shoes. This is the all-time leader in triple doubles we're talking about, the 2017 NBA MVP. Quite possibly the most athletic point guard in the history of the game. For most of his career, it was easy. His role was to show up to the arena and just be Russ. He was a headliner, and as a headliner, he earned the privilege to play his way. The people wanted him to play with that freedom, and the organization never tried to take it away from him. It was a lucrative arrangement in Loud City that lasted 11 years. Then with one shot, the two parties went their separate ways. For the Thunder, that meant it was time to rebuild. For Russ, it meant something else, something less straightforward. He was leaving the only place in the league he'd ever been, a team that trusted him to grow into his own way and handle his business with full autonomy. The good news was OKC was going to let Westbrook pick his next destination, and after a little bit of deliberation, he settled on Houston. At first glance, everything lined up. The Rockets had been near the top of the West for years, and another explosive creator seemed like the final piece of the puzzle. But there was a catch. Houston didn't want the Russell Westbrook they watched in Oklahoma City. They wanted a customized approximation of that player, and it was on Westbrook to meet these expectations. Just being Russ wasn't gonna cut it anymore. From this point forward, if he wanted to stay anywhere for the long haul, he'd have to be himself and someone else at the same time. Back in the late 2010s, Mike D'Antoni and James Harden built a system, and if you were a fan of the league when those two were cooking, you probably remember it. It was a simple, brutally efficient, and absolutely uncompromising way of outscoring teams that all hinged on the principle of spacing. What it boiled down to was a 4-out offense with one rolling big man, and the ball in the hands of James Harden. That was literally all it took. Eventually, they optimized it with a secondary engine meant to take the pressure off the beard with Chris Paul. That addition took them from interesting team in a loaded West to the only hope we had against the basketball Death Star over in the Bay Area. But now, the CP3 era had run its course, and they were thinking Russ could take his place. They knew Westbrook wasn't a perfect fit for the role, but they also knew he kind of had the tools for it. The idea was they would make a few adjustments to his game, then plug him right beside Harden and let the two former teammates figure it out. That sounds great in theory, but the only problem was they weren't just small adjustments. It started with cutting the mid-range out of his shot diet, and anyone who watched OKC Westbrook knows that that was an enormous ask. That sudden 18-foot pull-up was the primary counter in his scoring repertoire, but Houston made it clear if he was going to fit in down in Space City, then he'd have to find a new one. Then they needed him to learn how to play off-ball without cutting to mess up the spacing, which also wasn't a strong suit for him. Overall, they wanted Russ, the aggressive playmaker who relentlessly attacked the rim, but they didn't want Russ, the half-court creator who let instinct lead the way. And as it turns out, it's hard to separate those two in one off season. To start the year, Westbrook looked uncomfortable playing without the ball, predictable without his changeup, and just generally out of place. The Rockets themselves didn't look right. Nothing about the your turn, my turn style made sense when both creators needed different setups. But D'Antoni, the mustachioed madman that he is, came up with a highly experimental adjustment to unlock both engines at the same time. The Rockets started playing without a center. It was 5-out basketball before it was in vogue, and the whole team was thriving because of it, Westbrook included. They were racing up and down the floor, Harden dicing up defenses from the perimeter, Russ brutalizing the basket as rim protectors were stuck on PJ Tucker in the corner. There was a tinge of hope in the air, enough for the optimists to believe D'Antoni had cracked the code until the playoffs rolled around.
Just gotta stay positive, man, you know? Like I said the other day, through adversity, what you gonna do?
After a first-round win over his former team in OKC, the Los Angeles Lakers hit Westbrook with the oldest trick in the book. They dropped back and dared him to shoot. Houston never stood a chance, and when it was over, the experiment was written off as too fragile to survive playoff pressure. The Rockets felt like they had to make too many sacrifices in order to make this situation work. So at the end of the year, the two sides agreed to go their separate ways. He was told the organization needed to restructure, and for the second time, the team told him he didn't fit into their plans for the future. It was a tough reality, one that makes you kind of sit back and think, what was next for him? How much longer could he sit around in this league? But those were thoughts that didn't need answers right away, because his next destination was in Washington. It was a quick pit stop in the nation's capital as a contract hire. Both sides understood the deal here. Russ would be in DC for 1 year, and the Wizards would let him be exactly who he was for that single season. They put the ball in his hands. They let him direct the offense and gave him the green light to play his game. They were letting Russ be Russ. Of course, that roster wasn't gonna make any real noise in the postseason. Deep down, the fans probably knew that, but Westbrook fueled the team to an unexpected playoff berth anyway, breaking Oscar Robertson's career triple-double record along the way. It was a mutually beneficial, quietly inspiring year. The Wizards walked away with a rejuvenated fan base, and Westbrook left with the proof that he still had it. And now he was going back to the place where it all started, to find his fairy tale ending. As a Southern California kid in search of a championship, a return to LA felt conceptually correct. The Lakers had a core that had won a title only a couple years ago. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and a collection of brand name role players. With Westbrook as the third star, anything felt possible. It was a warm-hearted cliche, the weary warrior coming home for his final march. But there were some housekeeping items to get out of the way before the cinematic ending got underway. Just a couple of role adjustments, nothing major. Starting with corner threes. With LeBron James on the squad, Russ couldn't be the only, or even the primary source of downhill creation. Most possessions would start and end with the king, and that meant Westbrook had to find a way to support the offense without being a redundant creator. Next, LA wanted a primary on-ball defender, someone who could dedicate all of his energy to causing havoc on the defensive end, and then pick his spots offensively. 10 years ago, that might have worked, but this wasn't 10 years ago. He simply just wasn't that player anymore. And at 33, it seemed a little insane to ask him to play like a 24-year-old version of himself. But hey, what do we know? Maybe they could figure it out, draw on the fountain of youth LeBron found, and keep the dream alive. Unfortunately, that is not what happened.
Trade LeBron James, trade Anthony Davis, trade Russell Westbrook.
This is just a game. This is just a game. This is not end all be all. And when it comes to basketball, I don't mind the criticism of missing and making shots, but the moment it becomes where you know, my name is getting shamed, it becomes a issue.
So yeah, that was brutal, but we're gonna be candid for a second. As basketball fans, that first season was tough to stomach. Yes, Russ wasn't playing well, but this wasn't Oklahoma City, it was Los Angeles. And that meant the Sharks not only were out, they were circling. It didn't matter what he did, accepting a bench role, trying to change his game. None of it made any difference. All of Southern California was angry with him for being himself and failing to do a good enough impression of someone else. And the rest of the world was content with pointing and laughing from afar. Then he came back next season as the same guy, and the resentment only heated up. Finally, midway through his second season with the team, the Lakers were done with this relationship. They traded Westbrook to the Jazz, where he was cut before playing a game in Utah. After the initial relief from the end of that radioactive situation, a somber question drifted back into the picture. Was Russell Westbrook done? It was worth asking, because this wasn't a typical wrong place, wrong time kind of deal. It was the lowest of lows, a modern nightmare of devastating advanced stats with a constant onslaught of memes after every performance. Sure, if he kept going, his next stop couldn't be any worse, but maybe it was best to cut the losses, put on an orange jacket, and retire to some beach house on the coast. Instead, before we could even finish that thought, the other team from the City of Stars came calling. The Los Angeles Clippers paid close attention to Westbrook's Laker tenure, and as a franchise in the market for an aggressive floor general, they felt like they had the right pieces in place to make it work with the Brody. Plus, they were getting him for a $37 million discount. I mean, at that point, why not give it a chance? Their abridged first season together was better than his time with the Lakers. Russ was back in the starting lineup on a team with only one center instead of three, but it was still clunky. Kawhi, PG, and Russ on the floor at the same time inevitably ended with two players standing around as one went to work. So in year two, with a blockbuster trade bringing James Harden over from Philly, Ty Lue gave Westbrook a hard truth. It was time for the 9-time All-Star to come off the bench. Now there are a lot of ways people handle demotions. Some quit, some start questioning themselves, and some show up to work with an anger that never leaves. Frankly, depending on the situation, those are all justified. But Russell Westbrook didn't do any of that. He just accepted it. For one season, Russ facilitated for the second unit, leaned into his strengths as a point of attack defender, and trusted his teammates with the ball over himself. It was actually a little jarring. No one thought he could dilute himself and still keep his spark. And yet here he was, taking a step back in the name of the team and making everyone around him better in the process. He was back, or at least a version of himself was, and this team was reaping the rewards. The Clippers won 50 games and secured a first-round matchup with the Dallas Mavericks, where they trusted Russell Westbrook to be one of the primary defenders for Luka Doncic. Russ pulled out all the stops, constant aggression, an agitating amount of physicality, and a compilation of fiery moments meant to get Luka off his game. The results were a bit mixed, but in the end, Luka and Kyrie did enough to send the Clips home in 6 games. Afterwards, LA started revising their roster for next season, and even though Westbrook had been a positive impact on the team, the Clippers found themselves with more flexibility than before. In free agency, they could replicate most of his on-court impact with a cheaper, quieter alternative. For a franchise trying to keep the spotlight on their newly assembled core, a full-fledged role player made more sense than a one-time star who could become a story at any moment. On the bright side, it wasn't another ugly breakup. This one was amicable and professional, but it was still another dismissal, and that meant another summer of updating his resume. Most front offices shied away because of the ambiguity that followed him everywhere he went, the baggage, the headlines, the risk. But one person saw things differently. He wasn't a general manager or an owner. He was the best basketball player in the world, and he was asking for Russell Westbrook by name. At this point, none of us knew what to expect. Sure, Westbrook had reinvented himself, but at the same time, it wasn't enough to hold down a clearly defined role. And really, that was his story for the last 4 years. He was a constantly extrapolating contradiction, a variable that seemed to change with every second. And no one knew how to integrate that into a working team, except for the Serbian supercomputer out in Denver. See, even though they had won a title 2 years ago, the 2025 Nuggets were pretty desperate. They still had their core guys, MPJ, Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, and of course, Nikola Jokic. That was enough to keep them in contention, but it was also all they had. The West was getting tougher and tougher by the minute. Denver knew they needed some signs of life on that bench to stall those devastating runs, or maybe to even start some of their own. And that was exactly where the always changing variable fit perfectly. It was another 1-year deal with a team option. And no, the Nuggets wouldn't pick it up at the end of the year. But whatever, who cares whether or not he did enough to earn an extra year? Because in that one season, that 36-year-old played with a more consistent source of passion than most rookies fighting for their futures. He was patrolling passing lanes like a cop at the end of the month trying to hit his quota, cutting with the feel of someone who had played with Jokic for years, and routinely bringing energy to a team trying to win another title without any semblance of depth. Some nights, it was ugly, there's no denying that. Some nights, it was pure magic.
Before I ask him a question, what do y'all think about Russell Westbrook as a Denver Nugget?
This was it, a fully realized late career Russell Westbrook, still himself, still uncontrollably passionate, uniquely chaotic, and extremely vocal, exactly who he was and exactly what his team needed. As much as some of us wanted it, there wasn't a storybook ending waiting in June. The Nuggets didn't raise the trophy, and Russ didn't stare up at the confetti. But honestly, that was never the point. We don't think Russ went to the Nuggets to add another notch in his resume. He went there to compete, to hustle, to go 1,000 miles per hour on a Wednesday night game when everyone else there wanted to walk through the motions. And finally, he found a place that needed and appreciated it, even if it only lasted 1 year. Afterwards, it was back to free agency, just a quiet return to the job search from the most impassioned man in the business. Months passed and we didn't hear anything. And then those questions resurfaced louder than ever, and it had never been clearer. Time was ticking. Would we really have an NBA season without Russ? Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the Kings called. The black hole of organizational apathy in the middle of California. It's a fan base used to reluctantly accepting their fate before the halfway mark of the season, and we won't sugarcoat it. It looks like they're in for much of the same this year, but one of the few bright spots in another gray season has been Westbrook, the aging point guard who's still putting up triple doubles and clawing for every win he could get, even on a team with no playoff prospects and no long-term plans with him. Then, when the season's over, he'll call his agent and he'll do it over again. Dismiss that if you want, we won't.